Thanks everyone for turning up today, and welcome to this event, which marks the launch of IPPR's report on unlocking local action on clean air. I'm really excited to be joined by some great speakers here today. But before we crack on, I'm just going to run through a little bit of housekeeping. So this launch is going to be recorded and it will be available on IPPR's website after the session is finished today. And there will be a Q&A session. So please do submit your questions as we go. If you use the Q&A function box, and you can upvote other people's questions. Any contributions can go into the chat box, but specific questions, please put them in the Q&A box so we don't miss them. And we will hopefully come to as many of those as possible at the end. So I'm Maya Singer-Hobbs. I'm a senior research fellow at the IPPR. I have stepped in today for Daniel Knowles, who is going to be chairing, but is unfortunately unwell and so not able to be here. I am one of the authors on the report. I'm joined today by Liz Godfrey, who is from Mums for Lungs in Manchester. We have Waseem Zaffar from NBE, who's the founder of the Clean Air Justice Network. Councillor Charlie Hicks is running a couple minutes late, but he will be joining us, and he's the Deputy Chair of the Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee at Oxfordshire County Council. And we have Carolyn Axtell, who's a campaigner at Possible. Really delighted to have you all with us today. So I am going to run through briefly some of the key findings of the report. I'm also joined today by Louise Marix-Evans, who is my co-author on the report, and since I've had the chair, she will be fielding any questions that you might have on the report. So I'm going to present the report, some of our key findings, and then what we did and how we approached this problem. Then we'll have some reflections from our panelists, and then we'll open the floor up to you all for your questions. So can I share my screen? Hopefully everyone can see my screen. So this report was supported by Impact on Urban Health and the Clean Air Fund, and we're really grateful for their support. And the aim of the report was to look at what actions are available to local authorities to take action to clean up air, local action on air. And I'm hoping that the sort of overall message from the report is a hopeful message. There is lots that local authorities can do on clean air, but there are some real barriers to action, and there's lots that national government in particular can do to unlock more action on clean air. So what did we do? How did we approach this problem? We started with a technical review of the powers and duties available to local authorities to take action on air quality, and we'll come back to this in a minute. We also carried out focus groups and interviews and a deliberative workshop with members of the public. We carried out a whole number of interviews and workshops with local authority councillors and officers and local and clean air advocates. And we also carried out polling of urban councillors across England, across a representative range of political parties. So I'm not going to spend much time talking about air pollution and why we need to take action on it. I'm assuming that most of you are here because you know the urgency of the action. You've probably all heard the sort of numbers flagged, up 43,000 premature deaths in the UK alone. Worse for people who live on low incomes, in deprived areas, who already have pre-existing health conditions. And I'm sure most of you also know lots of the information on this slide, which is about the sources of air pollution. But one of the reasons that I want to talk about this slide is to identify some of the areas that local authorities have control over. So road transport and domestic combustion are the two that local authorities have the most control over. There are some others that are covered by environmental permitting, but we focused on the ones that local authorities can most easily influence. I think whilst we're on this slide, it's worth noting that ammonia in the top right-hand corner over there is predominantly caused by agricultural practices, but it can be a real problem in urban areas because ammonia in the air reacts to form particulate matter, and it's a transboundary pollutant, and it ends up in cities. And so this sort of highlights, I think, the need for local authorities to be working together about this problem, and for national government to be taking this seriously and supporting local authorities in the areas where they have less control over the sources of pollution. So what are the powers and duties that local authorities have on air quality? There's three main ones: local air quality management, smoke control, and environmental permitting. But one of the things that we found through this report is that many of the actual levers, so what can local authorities do to actually have an impact on these sources of pollution, are secondary powers and duties: transport and highways, local planning. And one of the issues is that this leads to real gaps in their powers, and this is particularly true for indoor air pollution. It's also a very confusing landscape of powers out there. There are overlapping powers, laws that have been introduced and replace other ones. They often sit in different parts of local government, and this can lead to unaligned incentives or sort of differing objectives. And so all of this paints a bit of a grim picture, but despite this, there is a real appetite among councillors for action. So when we polled councillors, these responses, apologies, it's a little bit small here, but these are, we asked councillors, urban councillors, to what extent they support or oppose different measures to improve air quality. And unsurprisingly, I'm sure the most popular one was making public transport more convenient, cheaper, and accessible. But even the one at the bottom there is charging people for using polluting vehicles in areas that breach safety guidelines for air pollution. And this had almost 60% support across all political parties, which we were really surprised about, actually. We didn't think that that would be the case, and particularly because we did this polling in August when this was in the news quite a lot. And we also found, interestingly, that councils do have the powers to implement quite a lot of these, but they don't feel that they do. And there are examples of councils that are taking bold action. So what were the councils that were taking bold action? What were the traits that they shared? So the first one was strong leadership. And this doesn't necessarily have to be the leader of the council, but it's usually someone reasonably senior in the council who sort of champions this as a case and supports action. We also found that there was integration across the council. So that might mean embedding air pollution as a priority across council strategies, making air pollution part of a decision-making process when thinking about other areas of council support, council action. And then the final one was ambition and a mandate to act. And this looked differently across different councils. It might have been a council that we saw examples of councils that carried out public deliberation and adopted the WHO guidelines with a target to achieve them by 2030. And what they said is that that gave them a real sort of mandate to act by their constituents, or campaigners who sort of ran on a manifesto of air quality. That sort of helped them feel like they could take that action required. So then why aren't councils doing this? There's a range. There's a lack of clarity over responsibilities, and this is particularly true of air quality partners who might be neighbouring authorities or other levels of local government. And there's a lack of, we often see that air pollution is treated a bit like a political football. So people saying, well, it's not our fault, it should be so-and-so acting on this. And we thought that really hinders action. A lack of funding, capability and capacity. And we heard anecdotally that there are real struggles with recruitment in this space, particularly for people with air pollution or air quality expertise. And then there's unclear information, and this applies to councillors who often said they're very busy, they're very stretched, they don't have the time or the capacity to go and find information, and when they do, they're not quite sure where to turn to for information, and that makes it really hard. And then obviously one of the massive barriers for not acting are the politics, and this summer we have all seen a big backlash to action that looks to address air quality, and there are lots and lots of sort of, this is particularly true also of fiscal levers, so clean air zones, road charging, the workplace parking levy. Nottingham faced a big fight to get that across the line. Speed limits in Wales, there's a lot of pushback. And one of the impacts of this is that councillors when we polled councillors, there was a real sense that they didn't think this was a priority for their constituents. So the councillors themselves, when asked if they thought air pollution was a problem, 60% of them said they thought it was. But when asked if they thought their constituents would think it was a problem, they thought that only 50% of their constituents would think it was a problem. Oh no, sorry, other way around. The councillors thought that 60% of their constituents would say air pollution was not a problem, despite themselves, 50% of them think it is. And so if they don't think that their constituents think it's important and it's not politically salient, it can make it quite hard for them to act. It acts as a bit of a disincentive for councillors to take what is perceived to be politically unpopular action. But does this marry up with what the people we spoke to were saying? And we spoke to members of the public, we carried out interviews and focus groups and a deliberative panel, and we found that the polarization that we hear a lot of in the media just really doesn't reflect the conversations that people had when we spoke to them on sort of one-on-one or in small groups. They found common ground pretty quickly, but they did have some concerns, and those were around things like the need for education. And this echoes what some of the councillors were saying, is that they just don't really know where to go for information. And there was a real need for things to be fair. So everyone needed to be seen to be doing their bit, and that applies to the council, but also to sort of businesses and other, their neighbours. People really need to they really emphasise that they wanted everyone to be seen to be doing their bit. So I'm nearly done. What can we do about this? We identified 3 sort of categories of action for national government. The first and the most important one is enabling local authority action. And that looks like long-term financial support and fiscal devolution to let local authorities make decisions for what is best for their local areas. There was also a need for them to set standards and be forward-looking. So we want to see national government adopt WHO guidelines. We want to see them tighten the regulatory landscape and to consider road user charging, and we can maybe come back to this in the Q&A, but there's plenty of evidence that suggests that if done well and if used as a replacement for some current clean air zones and existing taxes on driving, road user charging could be a progressive way of managing this. And then there's a need for information and data, so a public health campaign and good evaluation of initiatives so that local authorities can make informed decisions about what works. And then last, but certainly not least, what can local government do? So we broke these into 2 categories, strategic interventions, and a lot of these look to those ingredients for success in local authorities that have shown action. So adopting air quality into their strategies, carrying out meaningful engagement with the public and with businesses in their areas, and thinking seriously about how to reduce reliance on vehicles and how you can build that into local transport planning in an equitable and fair way. And then on the short-term interventions, things like road reallocation, so school streets, for example, to make sure that kids can get to school safely. Are there smaller interventions that can make bus services run more smoothly? For example, making sure bus lanes are free-flowing. Councils need to be leading the way, so this might mean electrifying their own fleets or sort of supporting local businesses to do the same. And then communication and engagement with the public. So that might look like real-time monitoring and communication of air pollution, and that can really help explain the need for action. And sort of mobilizing businesses through grants or loans, that sort of thing. that's all from me. I hope I didn't gallop through that too quickly. So now I am going to hand over to our speakers to sort of reflect back on this. And we're going to come first to Liz, if that's okay. So feel free to introduce yourself and then a little bit of the work that you do in this space and any reflections you might have on the report. Over to you, Liz.
Thanks, Maya. I'm Liz Godfrey. I'm the Manchester coordinator for the grassroots network called Mums for Lungs. And we campaign to highlight children's health and the effect that air pollution has on it. It's been really interesting to read the report, and I'm so glad that it's been released. I was sort of reflecting a lot about the misinformation and how to engage the public from it. I think recently there's been so much negativity, which makes people feel exhausted and it leads to inaction. And I do think that that's where our role is to come in and provide people with information about air pollution, make sure people understand the full impact that it does have on children's health. And in a way, that's where we're quite lucky because we are focusing on children. So we have quite a captive audience. You know, parents are interested. They want to know about these things. But I think it's really important that we're not only giving people the information, but we are telling that in a story, humanizing the issue, making sure people understand the emotional consequences, the impact it has on everyday lives. And I think it's also, as a group, we're trying to demonstrate that this promoting air pollution shouldn't just be in a negative fashion. We're trying to promote it as a positive lifestyle change. And I think that's the way to encourage people to change behaviour as well. I think you're absolutely right talking about the misinformation. I think we do lack information as a public. I know when I talk to people about it, they don't understand the issue. They see local data maps, which are coloured, say, green, to tell you that the air is clean, for example, in Manchester, but that's because it's relying on the UK levels. Whereas if we coloured the map to do with World Health Organization levels, you know, a simple tweak like that would paint an entire different story. And it's just some of these things, simple things that we can be doing to help give out that information to people, I think is really important.
Thank you very much, Liz, for those reflections and insights. It was interesting what you're saying about the need for positive reflection. When we were engaging with the public, someone said, oh, we were sort of looking at the nitrogen dioxide over time and it has gone down. And they said, oh, we had no idea that it had gone down. It's really great to hear that things can be done. And I think it was a good reminder for us because it can be possible to fall into a bit of a doom and gloom about this, but people do really want to hear those positive news stories. So thank you for those reflections.
Thank you.
Waseem, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Waseem Zaffar. I'm the founder of the Clean Air Justice Network. I'm also a councillor in the wonderful city of Birmingham, and I was the cabinet member for transport and environment who led on the introduction of the clean air zone here in Birmingham a few years ago. I've still got the scars on my back from there. They still haven't healed. I really welcome this report. I think it's a very interesting report, a very relevant report. And over the next 12 months, as we see the culture war getting deeper and deeper because of the general election, I think it's reports like this that remind decision makers, politicians, campaigners, and the wider public about the importance of tackling this serious issue that we've got around poor air pollution, which impacts drastically on our communities and contributes massively to health inequalities, in particular impacting on the poorest, disproportionately impacting on the poorest in society, on BAME communities and white working class neighbourhoods too. So there's a real equity issue as well as inequality issue that we really need to tackle. Just some reflections. I think the comment about having a champion within a local authority or champions is really important. I had very strong support from the then leader of the council, who were very, very closely with me, and both of us really championed the introduction of a clean air zone, which was very difficult to get through our political group, which was very difficult to get through our council, and was very difficult to get through our city. It was absolutely the right decision to do so, because it was looking about getting Birmingham to legally compliant levels of NOx. It was the start of the fight back. It wasn't about getting to safe levels, which I think is really, really important. So the World Health Organization targets are really important to get us to safe levels of air pollution, whilst Birmingham is on its way to get into legal levels of air pollution, particularly with NOx. We're nowhere near safe levels, and I think that's really vital. As a father and as a corporate parent of children in Birmingham, that's a real priority for me. It's important that our children and our children's children are growing up in a city where they're breathing clean air and growing up advantaged rather than disadvantaged as they currently are. In terms of some of the challenges we had, one of the criticisms I will have of government is they gave us a ministerial direction. They made us do this. So there was a legal imperative on Birmingham to introduce a clean air zone, but they very much refused to provide any political support to us. They refused to come and have any photo shoots with us. They didn't want to come and cut the ribbon for the clean air zone with us. They sort of said, go and do this, and gave us some money, not all of the money that we needed, and then very much distanced themselves. And the Conservatives in Birmingham took a very much an opposition approach to this and tried to politicise an issue which should not be politicised. This is about people's health, people's well-being, and should never be politicised. So that was a particular challenge for us. I think engagement is really important. Too often local authorities confuse engagement with consultation. Consultation is a statutory requirement that comes right at the end of the process. Engagement comes right at the start, so it's really important you engage. And whilst we carried out a massive survey at the very start of the process for us, that survey helped us co-design and co-produce the mitigations and support the grant aid that we needed to support those most impacted communities get through the clean air zone. And without that level of engagement and conversations with the business community, with the taxi community, with the wider community, there was no way we would have been able to introduce the clean air zone with the little impact, well, with the reduced impact that it had, detrimental impact it had on the communities. Public health awareness is really important, and it's an issue educating and raising awareness within communities, but we have to do more and more. And for me, this is about health. It wasn't an environmental project, it wasn't a transport project. We looked at it through the lens of health, and that's why I thought the intervention from the Chief Medical Officer last December was absolutely vital and a catalyst and a game changer in our campaign to tackle air pollution right across society. And we have to do more. There's absolutely no other way to do it. And the final thing I'll say is, whilst you say that, and the report says that there's powers within local authorities have had massive austerity challenges over the last 12, 13 years. Birmingham has had £1 billion taken out of its budget. We're starting discussions on taking out another £200 million over the next budget conversations that we're about to commence. There's massive challenges. So whilst councils might have powers, they do not have the resources. And for me, one of the other big challenges we've got is the lack of powers over public transport. Public transport is absolutely essential. And I can't commend Andy Burnham enough for the work that he's done in Greater Manchester. While his approach to air quality probably hasn't been where it should be, but his approach to tackling the challenges around public transport have been in the right place. And we need more local and regional leaders to take that approach. But local authorities don't have the powers to influence public transport, nor do they have the resources to be able to make those changes. So I will say, we have to support local authorities, local leaders, and through local leaders, local communities more to be able to bring about the changes they require. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those insights. Loads of stuff to think about there, and I can see questions coming up in the Q&A for you about some of those. Before we come to the Q&A, Charlie, I'm going to turn to you next to just say who you are and some reflections on the report and on your work in this space.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Maya. And it's really great to follow the previous speakers, especially Waseem, who I looked up to with great admiration, the work he did in Birmingham. Thank you for this excellent report, and I think it really neatly summarizes sort of where we're at and where knowledge is at really across our kind of ecosystem. What I've been thinking about recently is what's the politics? What are the political narratives that are going to work? So the Climate Change Committee says we've got to bring in measures to limit traffic growth. That's what it says in there, and the government's done nothing for it. Now, what's the politics around that? I think in anything in transport in particular, there are three key narratives, whether you're the motor lobby in the 1920s or you're the cycling and walking lobby in Amsterdam in the 1970s, or you're us here today. I think there are three key narratives that work. And those are freedom, number one, freedom, number two, safety, and number three, fairness. So if you're in the 1920s and you're the motor lobby trying to get through your cars, so completely mixed streets, you want the pedestrians out the way so cars have the right of way. The two narratives they used were the car is your freedom and we've got to stop pedestrians being killed, so let's put them on the side of the road. And that worked. Today, we're hearing a lot that still freedom, Rishi Sunak on the front page of the Telegraph, to be a libertarian is to be in a car, and freedom is the car still. So they still have that one, but we can take that if we talk about freedom of choice, about how we move around. And I think that's essential on the politics if we're going to make the change. The second one is safety, which I think more naturally fits within this kind of coalition, in particular safety of children. And we saw that be very effective in the 1970s in Amsterdam, where they led with Stop the Child Murders. And along with the oil crisis, that helped change society there. And the third one is fairness and social justice. And I think those people who are against low traffic neighborhoods and cycle lanes and clean air zones and ULEZ and all that, they appeal to fairness, both of fairness of outcome and fairness of process. We're not being listened to, they're dictators, etc., etc., etc. It's about we're not in the room, it's not fair because our voices aren't being heard. And again, that narrative of fairness, that container of fairness, we can also win on that with cost of living, with health, with inequalities, exactly as Waseem is saying. So I would sort of encourage everyone to think about those three containers. You can put any policies in them if you can get the political narrative right. So that's what I'd really, really advocate. And then I've been thinking, okay, so what are the policies that are cross-cutting across the centre and the left? And I think they are cutting congestion to increase buses. Everyone can get behind that. This may be unique to Oxford, but going after congestion that's at private schools sounds quite niche, but I think if you look at the data around congestion and the amount of pollution that comes from when private schools are in versus when it's just state schools, it's massive. So there's a really interesting politics around private school traffic. And then, and Waseem has done a lot more work on this than we have, free bicycles and free bicycle training for families and children from more deprived backgrounds. I think those three, you can build broad coalitions. And then especially with what Caroline's done in Waltham Forest, that I think ticks that box massively. One or two other kind of reflections that I've had on resource, as Waseem was saying, we have to look to climate finance. I really think we're not going to get this from central government, even under, we're not going to get the scale of funding that we need. But there are billions of pounds being thrown at climate policy across the board. From now, we've got AJ Banga, I think, is the new president of the World Bank. There downwards, climate finance, we have to look at Bristol City Council, £500 million investment. How can we access some of that funding for these policies? And then one final thing I will end on, which might sound a little strange. I think we need to look to mediators and even psychologists to look to heal divisions across our communities around what's sort of the tensions that have flared up. And I think there is good sort of practice and research and the kinds of people who mediate in citizens' juries, in citizens' assemblies. I see a great opportunity there for kitchen table conversations between people on both ends of the spectrum to come together. And interestingly, a few of those are beginning to happen in Oxford, and the policies they come up with are reduce congestion for buses, go after private school traffic, and free bike training. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Charlie. And now over to you, Carolyn, to talk us through what Possible has been doing in this space.
Thank you, Maya. Yeah, so I'm from Possible, which is a climate action charity, national charity, and we work on a range of relevant measures, including looking at sort of things like solar panels on schools. We've done quite a bit of work around transport, especially our Car-Free Cities campaign that just wrapped up this summer. And with a separate hat on, I'm also a trustee of Muslim Women's Cycle Charity, Cycle Sisters, and founder of Joyriders, a similar organisation, which is what I think Charlie was referring to just then, in terms of creating community champions to reach into underrepresented communities and get them involved in active travel. I'm a former cycling instructor as well. So our work, my particular perspective is around the roads and transport and, reducing traffic. So we do know that vehicle kilometres need to reduce between 20 to 60% by 2030. If we're still aiming for net zero for 2030. And the YouGov poll in 2022, which I think is different from the research you were looking at earlier, had similar findings that people care more than you think they do, and more than the MPs think they do. It's actually more important to people than than what their perception is. So this stuff is important to people. I would highlight the need to work with local champions and trusted messengers, like Waseem has already mentioned. So we advocate, for example, getting down to your local hospitals, getting to the respiratory units, see who's treating the children, see if they're interested in becoming a local voice. So those kind of trusted voices are really important to work with and amplify. Obviously focusing on public health, children's safety, all of those things that are really hard to argue with. And what we do know, we've produced a number of reports and resources at Possible that are worth checking out on everything from, we've got one recently about SUVs, school streets, looking at local traffic neighbourhoods and equity, you name it, any aspect of this we've done in our partnership with the Active Travel Academy. And the one that we published this summer looked at the impact of councillors' positions on low traffic neighbourhoods and whether it affected voting behaviour, and we found that that wasn't the case. So we know that councillors worrying about losing their seats is a big one. But what we've really found is that it's ultimately about holding your nerve and just having the courage to see those things through. You get this huge backlash. I think Charlie's, spoken about this himself. The noise that people make on the internet doesn't actually represent people's views more widely. People are going to argue, the opposition is inevitable, but you just have to ride it out. And if you can time your measures and your implementation with the electoral cycle so that you're proposing something as a policy before you get elected, but don't share the detail, then you come up with the detail afterwards, you implement it, you can wait for the dust to settle before the next election comes round. You've just really got to be bold. Some of the kind of things that I love are Nottingham, where they introduced a workplace parking levy, and that raised that's the only place in the UK to have done that, I think, so far, and they raised £90 million to spend on sustainable transport, public transport, if you look at their 10-year impact report. We've got a parking assessment tool which I can share, which enables local councillors, council officers and campaigners to assess their council's parking policy to see how well their council is doing in terms of using parking policy to tackle climate change and air quality, because those are powers that we know that local councils do have that they can be doing a lot more with. And we're also campaigning on parklets at the moment, which are, these are examples of positive climate action that ordinary people can do. So small interventions that actually can really capture people's imagination and have quite a big impact. Obviously, focusing on the co-benefits is really important. And I think, we've got our nice slide about the good old Goodwin curve that shows that, you are going to hit maximum opposition just as things are implemented, but it really tails off. I would say that as possible, we were the sort of major voice advocating for the ULEZ in London. We did loads of media around that, around the ULEZ expansion. And like Waseem was saying, there wasn't even support for the scrappage scheme in London. You know, that has to come, that doesn't come from central government. You know, TfL has had to find the money themselves, but the polls showed that the salience of ULEZ completely dropped off in terms of polling once it was in, and now nobody cares about it now that the expansion's been done. So I think a lot of it is just about confidence, holding your nerve, being prepared for the backlash and expecting it. And I really like Charlie's suggestion about looking at working with psychologists to try and kind of heal some of those divides from all of the culture wars that have been stoked up. I think lastly, I would just say that okay, don't rely on just consultations. If you can actually do some polling before you implement the changes and after, then you've actually got data that you can point to that shows that people do like these measures. They're scared of change, but once the changes are in, you know, most people don't want to go back. And we do need to have the sticks as well as the carrots. All the evidence, the government's own reports show us that, you know, the carrots on their own are not enough. You've actually got to make it more difficult for people to drive. You've got to make it more expensive, and you've got to have the carrots to kind of make those sticks more palatable. Yep. So those are my reflections. Great.
Thank you, Caroline. There's some really great food for thought in there, and I've been looking at the questions coming in, and I've been trying to sort of group some of them together into themes, but I would just wanted to sort of reflect a little bit. There was a few things that sort of jumped out in this conversation. There's something about the co-benefits that you've all mentioned, the co-benefit of tackling air pollution and health, the co-benefits of tackling air pollution and climate change. And I think one of the things that we came across in this work is that can be a bit confusing for the public sometimes, but it also gives you a good way of talking about it. So of the sort of themes that have emerged, there's lots of questions about information and monitoring, some questions there around indoor air pollution, a bit around health and where there are a lack of powers. But the one that I want to start us off with is the question of fairness. And I think there is a question about how do we make sure those who are most impacted by air pollution are not the ones who how do we make sure they don't sort of bear the responsibility of having to change their behavior or knowing where to go to look for information, and how do we sort of balance that? And I just wanted to sort of throw it out to the panelists to see whether anyone had any reflections. Charlie, I can see you've got your hand up.
Thanks, Maya. So a year or two ago, I was working at LSE Cities, and I was working on a project called My Fair Share, looking at the sort of research on fairness and transport. And what I found, and it very much resonated with what I found on the doorstep with having 3 low traffic neighborhoods in the division I represent, what I found is there's kind of 2 kinds of fairness. There's the one that we all know about, which is the outcome fairness, the distribution of costs and benefits. Do people have fewer or more cars in front of their house? Some people do, some people don't, for a period of time. So boundary roads versus inside. That kind of that kind of outcome unfairness is going to happen. Some people are going to get more benefits than others. And that's what people talk about, that's what we focus on. What I want to draw your attention to is the second kind of fairness, which is procedural fairness. And this comes from the legal literature, I think. Now, procedural fairness, there are 3 key components. And if you can get these right, my belief is you turn down the heat massively on implementation. Those are explanation, voice, and respectful treatment. So explanation is simple. It's just telling people what's going on. And councils don't do it well enough, partly because comms and engagement is not seen as a key part of implementation. It's seen as a traffic engineer, highways engineer thing. Actually, it's a behavioural and comms thing. And if you look to the Welsh Government, they are working with the Behavioural Insights team and a behavioural consultancy called Lynn, L-Y-N-N, to deliver this stuff. Lee Waters has got it, that this is a behavioural science and comms thing. So you need really good explanations. And the second reason you need really good explanations is because of all the sort of fake news and all the noise around it. So you need to cut through that. And a lot of the noise is anxiety from people who just don't know what's going on. So really, really focus on explanations and get that right. Second one is voice. And that's what Waseem was talking about. It's not just the statutory consultation at the end of the process, it's the engagement. It's how do you engage people when the clay is wet rather than having, you know, officers come up with a plan, then they go to the consultants to put it into detailed designs, and then it goes to the residents and you just tweak it. How do you flip that? How do you start with a pen on paper and you give it to the residents, as Chris Boardman talks about with his beelines in Manchester? Give the pencil to the residents at the start, let them sketch big ideas, and then you go from there. So that's giving them voice. And the third part, respectful treatment, which is about recognizing that everyone's voice is legitimate, no matter how, no matter what they're coming out with and how horrifically sort of abusive they are being on one end of the spectrum. And I don't think there are that many of those people, but they're there. Is recognizing that the emotion that it sits behind that is legitimate. And we need to be able to reach across the aisle and communicate to those people, we see you and we see how you're feeling, and that's legitimate. It's legitimate because of the cost of living crisis, and you've got 3 kids and you're a single mum and you've got to get them to different schools and get to a shift work, and you know, how can you make that all happen? And then these sort of the council is making my life more difficult. That's legitimate for that person to be feeling that, you know, they hate the council. There's loads of stories like that, but we need to reach out and sort of help. And then the policies, I think, follow from that, whereby the policies that you implement alongside your sticks are addressing those key legitimate fears and backlash, because people's lives are complex and difficult. So procedural fairness is key, and focus on explanations, voice, and respectful treatment.
Thanks, Charlie. Did anyone else want to come in on the sort of question of fairness and how to do this fairly?
Can I just quickly come in, Maya? I think the key point that Charlie makes that we really need to focus on is, how do we take our communities on the journey with us? And how do we do things with communities rather than to communities? And some of that is providing them with extra support. Equity is a big issue that we really need to look into. And what we did in Birmingham was ensure that, one of the biggest oppositions we had was Birmingham's taxi drivers. There's about 7,000-8,000 of them working hard in incredibly difficult times, just coming out of COVID, where the industry took a battering like many others. So we had to get them the support. We secured £15 million of funding to support them through that. But at the same time, and I was a former trade union rep for taxi drivers in Birmingham, and my late father was a taxi driver. And the key thing I was getting across to them is the benefits of introducing a clean air zone they will benefit more than many others, because drivers, whether it's taxi drivers or bus drivers, earning a living sitting behind a car wheel, are 3 times more likely to be exposed to poor levels of air pollution than the average person. So it's about explaining that to them. But the first thing they're worried about is, will they be able to come into the city, earn a living, and feed their children? Once we got them the grants, once we got them the support, then we can have the next bit of the conversation about the benefits. And then they were able to go on and sell it to their customers that they were carrying, and many others. So it's about how we take people on the journey with us and the process to get there. It's never easy. And as politicians, the other point that was made earlier by Carolyn with respect to elections and introducing these policies, the timing of it is absolutely essential. We had challenges with delays from government because their back office were ready, and COVID and everything else. We introduced the Birmingham Clean Air Zone 11 months before an all-out election. And I was consistently told by people in my party and others that this will come up on the doorstep and it will lose the election. We went into the 22 election with 2/3 of the council Labour. We came out of it exactly at 2/3. And what I heard from colleagues is either not coming up on the doorstep, or if it was coming up, it was coming up with a positive element. So hold your nerve. Timing is absolutely important. We saw what happened in Oxfordshire. Nobody planned for Boris to resign, and Sadiq didn't plan for Boris to resign so close to the introduction of the extended ULEZ. But that was a problem we had. So we just need to hold our nerve and think of this as a positive political story. I know there's been some examples of LTNs where people have lost seats, what have you, but people like me and Charlie didn't come into politics to win elections. We came into politics to change people's lives, and I think that is absolutely paramount when we think about this.
Thanks, Waseem, for that. Louise, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you. Wanted to come in to sort of summarise the fact that some of the recommendations around powers is that although local authorities do have these powers, the gaps in them mean that they're not holistic. And that's the same as for the powers that local authorities have for tackling climate change and delivering on net zero and a well-adapted place. So we've got this sort of jigsaw that everyone's sort of juggling together with fragmented and competitive funding streams, which means you can't have the holistic sort of journey that people need to go on, where they are involved in that design and their voices are heard and it's fair and equitable, because you're putting in the accessible bus routes, you're freeing those buses up, which benefit the poorest, and that you're sort of combining all of these things that you would like to do to make a place better. It's this stop-start kind of policy where we're constantly cobbling together and working through a maze which is set up by the policy environment, that I think also makes it much harder to land it politically and do that sort of long-term engagement and investment that we need with the correct sequence, so that you can drive down car use by putting in place the alternatives, and it sort of happens reasonably seamlessly. It's this very stop-start, and then that gives this space for this sort of uncertainty, fear, contention, and argument. And so that's why, I think we need to be campaigning on all of these things to bring those powers, but also critically the resources and funding methods further down, devolve them down to the place.
I'm going to come to you, Charlie, in a second, but I just want to throw out a couple of questions that have come up, which I think are around the theme of trusted messengers. And there's been some questions about the health implications and whether people are hearing this from their GPs and whether we're sending trusted voices out into the communities. And I think in some ways that relates to what you're saying there, Louise, about the need for there to be a sort of a consistent message out there about what we're trying to do and why air pollution is important, and who those voices are is going to change on the different communities that you're working with. I would imagine that having engaged with taxi drivers and having been a taxi driver yourself makes it easier to engage with that community in the same way that a GP might be in a trusted way to engage with someone else. And I just wondered whether anyone had any reflections on that, or the role of trusted messengers in helping get this across. Charlie?
Thanks, Maya. It's with the sort of behavioral science hat on, the first kind of mnemonic I think that the behavioral insights team came up with was called mind space, if I remember correctly, and the M stands for messenger. So there's a whole load of behavioral science literature on this, and so it's absolutely key. From my understanding, doctors and healthcare professionals are super trusted, and we saw that there's a lot that we can learn from the behavioral insights from the pandemic and vaccines that we can bring across here. So doctors are well respected, I think, and Waseem will be able to speak to this much better than I can, but also, and Carolyn too, about the Muslim community and having leaders in Muslim and in East Oxford's context, the South Asian community, leaders in those communities being the voices. And I think when vaccine clinics were moved into mosques, my understanding was uptake was much higher. And I think there's stuff that we can learn there. Those, and then union leaders, I think, are particularly also really important messengers for this.
Thanks, Charlie. Waseem?
Yeah, everybody trusts their doctor. They certainly trust doctors more than they trust politicians. But so yeah, doctors and we had some brilliant champions, particularly from the Birmingham Children's Hospital, who were Chris Chiswell, Dr. Chris Chiswell and Dr. Satish Rao are absolutely phenomenal and really care about this issue. But for me, we've got to trust community activists. We've got to go and build relationships with them. Some of them are faith leaders. Some of them are just grassroots level community activists who just want to see positive stuff happening. And we've been doing a lot of work with Asthma Lung UK in Birmingham as the Clean Air Justice Network to capacity build, train, educate some of those community activists. So invest time and resources into building them. They've got congregations, they've got a following. So they're well worth investing into, but they just need some help and guidance. And third thing is, we've done a lot of work in schools. Our young people are a big asset. In Birmingham, we declared a climate emergency in 2019 because young people literally marched on the council house every Friday and cornered us to do that. So young people are absolutely brilliant. But through the young people is how we can get into the school community through the school gates and utilize their skills and ability to challenge their siblings and parents for that behavioral change. And sometimes they need just need subtle changes. Like my biggest challenge every morning is trying to convince my children to walk to the local school, which is just up the road. But now I've got my son who's challenging me to do that, which is absolutely brilliant. So I think young people are an absolute vital asset. But this needs time, this needs investment, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution, particularly in diverse urban spaces like London and Birmingham and other places. And it's about how we can, develop some of those solutions in partnership with those communities. Those activists, those faith leaders understand their communities better than anyone from the public sector. So whilst the public sector and professionals and practitioners are doing amazing work, they've got research, we've got some brilliant examples here in Birmingham, particularly with the University of Birmingham, is how we can translate that into lay people's language down into the community and use that information to empower them to make that change in the community. There's no point doing all this work up here if you don't get down into the communities through those trusted community allies.
Great, thank you for that one. Carolyn, then back to you, Charlie.
Yeah, just echoing really what the others have said about working with local communities and really making sure that you're working with communities that represent, working with people that represent your communities. The last thing you want to be doing is sort of reinforcing divides. People need to see themselves represented. So whether it's trying to support people more with active travel, or whether it's providing, for example, clean air champion training. There's a few different kind of training schemes available for those local community leaders, giving them the support that they need. And whenever we're running a campaign and we're recruiting, we always try to recruit people from diverse communities, and we recompense them for their time, because often that's that's also an equity issue, expecting people to try and somehow find time in their busy lives. Often the people that are more able to campaign are the ones that have the luxury of time because they're retired or whatever their kind of economic circumstances are. So making sure you're giving that support to people so that they've got access to, the knowledge that they need to reach into their communities. I mean, I'm a big advocate for things like, we've seen things like cycle training projects with local mosques, training the kids after madrasa, to get them riding. They go and sort of put pressure on their parents, and you can easily get 50 people then on a bike ride, and people start to sort of see themselves represented, and then the change just kind of cascades like a waterfall. So again, I would say have a look at a lot of the resources that we've got. I mean, I know that the Clean Air Wins campaign and the Clean Cities campaign that we were part of have got some really good resources that I believe are available for people to use. I've also seen a really good unbranded video. These are things that have been put out there, really excellent resources, and they're happy for people to use them, for local authorities to go ahead and use them and brand them as they need to. And I think those kind of things can really, help to get the message across.
Thank you, Charlie. And then Louise, and just a quick reminder to everyone there's loads of comments and questions coming in, but feel free to sort of upvote the questions that you like, and I'll try and get through a bunch of them. I'm sort of grouping them together so we get through a couple more. Over to you, Charlie.
Thanks, Maya. Just a quick plug for Chris Whitty. Sorry, Chris Whitty, I think he's still the Chief Medical Officer, and how important he is, I think, as a messenger, and because he's taken up the mantle of clean air, both indoor and outdoor air quality. And I was speaking to public health experts who are working right at the top of Public Health England, as it was there now, the UKHSA, and they say the big missed opportunity from the pandemic was indoor air quality. Because COVID's an airborne disease, the behavioral change about opening the window and people recognizing clean air was very salient, and that hasn't now translated into a public health set of policies around I think it's around 40,000 people who die prematurely from clean air. And there's a whole load of work that could be done. I don't know if you remember the adverts where the virus was made visual as if it was smoke. You're imagining it, if everyone's smoking in this room, would you open the window or not? That's what you should be thinking for COVID. And so there's potentially a whole lot of work that could be picked up from the public health world and brought across for the behavior change here. And crucial to that are our messengers, who are doctors and public health experts.
Thanks, Charlie. Louise?
Yes, yeah, I just wanted to pick up on sort of the messenger piece, but also, so we have messengers like a doctor or respiratory nurse or a district nurse or someone who might give you, they cascade down heat wave information or sort of cold information, that kind of thing from public health. So the councils will get weather alerts and impart that out. And they'll be recruiting people to be on sort of, where I live, flood alerts, but also if I'm susceptible to air quality sort of exacerbating a health condition I have, that they would be encouraging me to be able to monitor that so I don't go out running or go out when it's high pollution. But just thinking, so that's a sort of preventive side of life that we have in the sort of local authority sort of levers and powers, and that would sort of cascade out. Then we've got the kind of conversations, trusted messengers, or sort of people who lead conversations about what kind of solutions we want, which are over the longer term. And then we've got sort of the co-design piece, so that there are all different stages where and I think on behaviour as well, it's very important we can sort of urge people to leave their car at home or take up active transport. But to be able to do that and to influence that behaviour, they have to have the infrastructure and the know-how and for it to make sense. Otherwise, they feel blamed. So then we end up resisting the change. So where I live, I cannot cycle to Halifax. For work, it's too dangerous and I will not do it, though I am actually a seasoned cyclist. So there's a really good tool the Scottish government use, or used to use more, but should use more, the ISM tool. It looks not just at our individual behaviours, it looks at the individual, the social, sort of picks up on the meaning Charlie was talking about, is if you're juggling 3 children and a dog and work, it has to be possible to do that trip chaining. And then we have to look at what the material is, which is the infrastructure around us. Can I go on a separated route bike lane with my 3 children? Yes, in Holland, not where I live, maybe in London. So that we're looking really holistically again, and that takes us back to the need to do the sort of, what short-term changes can we do now? Is that a school street? What can we practically do ourselves as individuals without needing a lot of support? But then what is that long-term vision in the council with its partners to create a space that is very clean air oriented and that is fair and is safeguarding the most vulnerable people, or people who perhaps can't afford to make certain changes. So I just wanted to be very clear on that point. We're not blaming individuals or asking people to do things unreasonably. Thanks, Maya.
Thanks, Louise. That sort of leads nicely to the next sort of set of questions I was going to ask you about, which is a bit about a sort of crossover, I guess, between personal choice and indoor air pollution. So Louise and I talked a lot about indoor air pollution through the course of this project, because local authorities don't have loads of levers available to them to tackle indoor air pollution, but it's a big problem. And particularly the sort of wood burners, that comes up quite a lot. It's a massive source of indoor air pollution. And it's, in some ways, it sits in the same camp as the sort of SUV, big polluting vehicles camp, about the sort of how do we manage the sort of personal choice questions, but also the sort of educating people, and where does the line need to be drawn about legislation? So where do we have the personal choice and the information about the choices people are making versus legislation, and where do we sort of put that line? There's a question about whether a government should restrict size, weight, or engine size of vehicles, for example, or should wood burners be banned, those sorts of questions. Liz, you're up next.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to mention about wood burning with indoor air pollution, and the fact that at the moment, I think regulations are very confusing. There's so much misinformation, and a lot of campaigns are just focusing on, your type of stove, what fuel you burn, and the health consequences are not being put out there. That's not the message or the impact it's having on your neighbours. So I think that it's changing the message slightly with some of these things, potentially to say burn only if you have to, because there are people out there who do need to burn, but there are probably the vast majority of people who've recently bought a stove don't need to necessarily use it as their main source of heating. And again, I think at point of sale, there should be more legislation put in place by the government so that the sale of these stoves, it's very clear about the impact it's going to have on your health and your neighbour's health as well. So I think there is opportunity there as well with the legislation, as well as then people making that informed choice themselves to maybe only burn on special occasions or whatever it is without being told you can't have it, full stop.
Thanks, Liz. Charlie?
Thanks, Maya. I was just responding to a question in the chat from Josephine. And I think, so we can appeal to altruism, absolutely, but I think we can also appeal to self-interest. When people know about how damaging the air quality is to themselves, then they will change their behavior. As we saw, I think in the 1950s with the Great Smog, then there was public outrage, then there was legislative change. So appeal to self-interest. And I just want to draw your attention to a great study that Imperial did that's written up in the Evening Standard from a couple of years back, which was children were given air quality monitors to go into their backpacks on the way to school. And what parents found and were horrified by was that it spiked when they were in the car. So the worst air pollution was in their metal box. All the air pollution was coming in from the exhaust in front of them, and that was the worst place. And they had a 31% behavior change to walking and cycling and public transport from that. Massive. When you appeal to self-interest and people realize it's as if they could see the air pollution around them, and then they switched.
Thanks, Charlie. That's really interesting and relates to another of the questions. You guys are doing a great job of segueing your answers into the questions I was going to ask you next about information monitoring. And there's been a whole bunch of questions about access to information and diffusion tubes and whether you can measure stuff on a sort of real-time basis. And I know Louise has got things to say on this. So I'm going to hand over to you, Louise.
Yeah. We got completely bogged down trying to understand the monitoring system, I must say, on air quality, didn't we, Maya? It was kind of like once we thought we'd understood it, it turned out there was a whole nother parallel universe going on of sort of actual monitoring in real life, where Chris from Berry rolls his sleeves up and unscrews a diffusion tube, shakes all the spiders out and does whatever he does with that, through to the automatic real-time monitors that Hackney have installed, and I think Leeds have installed, so that on sort of proactive basis, through to sort of the national system of monitoring, which is then sort of pushed through along with the CO2 monitoring, which I saw someone had mentioned as well, sort of two separate sets of national monitoring and modelling that we do and then report to sort of into some global system. So lots of different complicated measures. And there was also a question about where we're sitting on our backsides in rural areas going, oh, well, our air's nice and clean here, and the council isn't even monitoring. How do you instigate that? And I must say, I didn't find a way to do it. And there is a duty to review and assess and monitor air quality. And if there's a concern, to put it in place, and then you can declare a local air quality management area, and then produce an action plan and then implement it. And the government have cracked down on that. And there's a lot more accountability around that, which is good news. But yeah, just in short, there's different ways of doing it. But I'd say the real-time monitoring isn't just a sort of backtrack of going, oh, let's install more monitoring and not do anything. I think it really is an enabler, because it helps back up evidence for councils to use in their strategies. It backs up evidence for them to justify decisions, as we saw in Hackney with the London Fields people saying, we're concerned that all these barbecues are causing pollution. And Hackney could look at the monitors, look at when barbecuing was going on, when the weather was nice, and go, yeah, it really does, we'll ban them. And they did. So I think it is, if it's put in place proactively rather than in a compliance kind of way to enable action, then I think very useful, but not to sort of enable inaction. And I will go away, Josephine, and say, well, is there a stick or a way? I've written here, speak to your councillor, write to your MP and say, how should we be monitoring this air quality? I'm uncertain, I'm happy about what's going on. And I think you have a duty, which they do, and read our report to find out which duty to hit them with, to do that. And they have to. And if they're still not happy, write to the Secretary of State and get them to do it. So yeah, I think monitoring has a really key role. Internally, of course, really hard, because we don't tend to monitor our indoor air. And Maya and I have become much more aware of our own indoor air quality. So I'm throwing windows open as long as my neighbour's not burning wood. And I've really reduced the use of our luxury wood burner even though we're on the top of a hill, because I'm aware of my pollution blowing straight to Leeds. So I think I'll stop now. Thanks, Maya.
Thanks, Louise. Waseem, over to you.
Thanks, Maya. Air quality monitoring is really important. But I think there's different requirements. There's obviously some very expensive equipment that we require to help devise policy for cities, towns, and cities, and we've got some very complex and sophisticated air quality monitoring in our city, particularly led by the University of Birmingham and their super site. But I think it's also really important for community activism and behavioural change and just awareness raising that we have air quality monitoring in our communities. And one of the things we did in Birmingham was using some of the Clean Air Zone revenue funding is ensure that every school in the city can have a yearly air quality monitoring station. That's about 400 air quality monitoring stations. Not every single school's taken that offer up, but the resources are there. But it's not just about putting the air quality monitoring station into that school. I'm personally convinced that the air quality monitoring station where my kids are, where I'm chair of governors, I'm probably the only parent who monitors it. So it's about how we can utilize that asset there. Online, I can access what the air quality monitoring is there at that school right this very moment in time. But what does that mean? How do we translate that into lay people's language and ensure that that is available to parents who aren't experts on air quality? It's not at the top of their priority. There's many competing priorities, but then they do understand it, and that helps them make their decisions about how they travel to school, and also how they encourage their neighbours to travel to school and their day-to-day activities too. So whilst I know that the yearly air quality monitoring is not the most reliable, it's not annual means, it's live data, it's not the most expensive kit in the world, but it does very much help about how people make their decisions. But there's no point being there if we don't utilize it to educate our communities. And I'm not blaming the school, by the way, because I know my teachers work extremely hard with reduced resources to do the job they're doing. We just need some extra resources to be able to go into those schools to help them out and educate and empower parents to understand what this asset's all about. Thank you.
Thanks. Charlie, over to you.
Thanks, Maya. I'll try and be brief. Just thinking from this conversation, a new idea has come in. I'm curious if anyone on the listening in the chat has done this. Has anyone used citizen science for air quality monitoring, whereby you give a number of people a portable air quality monitor to walk around their city inside and outside? I wonder if, because the reason I ask that is because at the moment in Oxford, a number of people are doing citizen science with traffic cameras, sticking them up in their homes with Cllr, which is a company, I think, based in the Netherlands. And it's getting really good quality data that the councils are now interested. And they're about £200 a pop. So, I mean, they're not nothing, but they're also not, for councils, that's peanuts. And because of the research we've seen from Imperial, I would just be really interested because then you've got, if it's geolocated and going through time, individuals are both going to see it for themselves to know where to go, but also you could then get a broad array. And I haven't heard of that happening anyway, so I'd be really interested.
Great challenge to the audience there, Charlie. Not challenge, question. Caroline, to you, and then I'm going to start to wrap us up.
It's Caroline, actually. Just to respond to what Charlie, I think you were just talking about the Cllr devices, Charlie. In our traffic counter, we did a citizen science project like that, and actually we found there was a lot of issues with the data. First of all, you got the problem that if you've got a lamppost or a telegraph pole or something in front of the window, it doesn't work. But also, we really had a lot of issues with the accuracy of the data in terms of how many vehicles, cyclists and pedestrians it was counting. So I don't know if it's the same devices that, but I would just sort of caveat that if anybody was thinking of doing that, just have a look into it first.
Thank you for that. I'm going to start to wrap us up now, but there's a question about how can local authorities make clean air more attractive to their local residents. So maybe we start to wrap up by asking you all to think about how to sort of sell a sort of positive vision of clean air to the people in your communities, and then a sort of reflection on the conversation as a whole. Stunned silence. Charlie.
I can kick off, and this is going to sound like it's not answering the question, but it is meant to be. Back to buses. 2 reasons: popular across political and public spectrum. And also, if we look at what Louise Haigh and Simon Lightwood are talking about, thinking ahead to the next government, it's buses, buses, buses. So whether it's the messaging or whether it's the policies, linking clean air to buses, I think, is key. And just picking up on one of the recommendations in the report about devolving powers, everything around franchising is so important, making sure that the franchising process can be as quick as possible so that local government can follow in the footsteps of Andy Burnham and others, and Sadiq Khan, in having bringing buses back into public control. That, and really small technical things that you'll find out from talking directly to bus operators, like red routes, double red lines that you can put on bus lanes. That means that cars don't park there. Anything that can be done along those lines, and then having a coalition, as it were, of transport types where you have walking, cycling, clean air to go with the buses. I think politically and public-wise, that's a really key way to group them all together.
Great, thanks, Charlie. Carolyn?
So I was slightly distracted because I've been sharing resources and links all the way through this, and just realised I was sharing them with the host and the panelists and not with everyone. So not all of those will have got through. But I think the question was something around, advocating for a positive vision to bring people along with us. And we did a project exactly on that when it comes to looking at traffic reduction and reducing car dominance in our cities. And I'll share a link to that. So designing visions that actually show people how different things could be, with then looking at how you can start to implement those, just gets people to start seeing, it's hard for people to picture it if they haven't seen it. And there's a really good tool called Better Streets, as in Better, Beta, BETA, that I think can be used for free by community groups, and can also be used by local authorities for redesigning areas. And it's a nice little tool you can use, digitally, to show how different something could look. And I think, again, all of the sweeteners, the carrots that we've talked about, the active travel measures, giving people a chance to, when it comes to active travel, giving people a chance to try things out. If you've got like a council event happening in the park, have bikes there for people to try, have your free bike loan schemes. I meant to mention earlier that like Pedal My Wheels tried something where they had a sliding scale for their Try Before You Bike scheme in London, because for some people £10 a month to try out a bike and then decide if they want to keep it after so many months. For some people, £10 a month is nothing. For some people, they just don't have that. And if you can use something like social prescribing to make that more available to people that need it, that's a way that you can sort of work on the equity side of things, and give people a chance to experience some of the positive benefits. And obviously things like place streets, school streets are also really good for showing people the positive aspects of change.
Thanks. Waseem?
Charlie's absolutely right. Buses are absolutely vital for our communities, and many cities, they are the principal way that people travel, and clearly buses right across our country, particularly buses outside London, are not fit for purpose. So we have to do a lot more. Caroline's absolutely right about some of the work that Possible have done on. They did a piece of work with the community next door to Lazelle's in Handsworth, where they worked with the community over a number of months to recreate some designs about how their street could look. And it was phenomenal to see people who have probably never been interested in shaping what their street looks like, never imagined that somebody would come and knock on their door and get them involved in a project. But it was phenomenal, and I went to the launch and really saw how passionate these communities were. And the third thing I want to say is around we talk a lot about active travel, and that's important. There needs to be a lot of investment into safe infrastructure, but we also need to look at access to bikes. A family of a husband, a wife, and 3 children, they can't afford to buy bikes. So it's important that we make them available. And there's been a brilliant project in Birmingham, Big Birmingham Bikes, that's been led by the Active Wellbeing Society, where they've literally given out 9,000 free bikes, some of that working with local GPs to socially prescribe those bikes, some of them to communities that were probably never cycled before. Now, you know, they took a group of mums who've never cycled before to do the half velo in Birmingham, which and they were predominantly Muslim moms. It was phenomenal. Now a lot of them who hadn't cycled before are actually cycling instructors. And they've also helped set up community cycling hubs in parks too. So there's a lot of really good examples of phenomenal work that's taking place, and it's how we can amplify that and ensure that more and more communities can have access to these resources and these services and projects which do work when you do engage with the communities.
Thanks. Liz?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up a bit like Carolyn was saying about school streets, and I think how important they are. They're sending out a really important message that we need to improve air quality around schools, you know, the impact air pollution has on cognitive development. There's more and more studies coming out about that currently. But I think for anyone who does the school run, reducing that level of stress, having that safety around the school gates, and encouraging active travel, so important. But it's also instilling those values in the next generation that we want them to be active. We want it to be the norm, that they're not just thinking they need to jump in a car to go everywhere, and that they are aware of things like air pollution. So I do think that values education is vitally important for the children to be learning as well.
Thanks, Liz. Louise, and then I'll come back to you, Carolyn.
Yeah, I mean, as a predominantly climate change person, I'd like to, rather than us talking about how are we going to retrofit our homes, which also touches on air quality because of damp and mold, and then what are we going to do about nature and green space? What are we going to do about air pollution and the sources of that? I think Charlie talked about it, how we're bringing in finance to areas is a nut that a lot of us are trying to crack at the moment around housing retrofit. But with community-led energy planning, which we've trialled through Carbon Co-op with Oldham Council, that was a conversation about houses predominantly and retrofit, but it was about how people live their lives and how they want to travel as well and what they want by way of green space. So we brought that together so we weren't constantly disturbing people or over-engaging with them and getting that kind of engagement fatigue. So I think talking to people about what they want from their area and what their ideas are, not just about single issue, but about the whole of their lives, I think is really useful. And I know it's hard to do and it can appear expensive to do, but if we do it separately for every issue we're trying to tackle, then that exhausts people and it wastes those skilled facilitators who can help facilitate those conversations. So that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see it really integrated in other things that we're doing as well as doing easier wins that you know tackle air quality quite rapidly.
Thanks, Louise. We are approaching the end of the session. I might just ask all of the panelists for sort of one final reflection, and then I will call off. I have found this really, really interesting. I've really appreciated all of your reflections. It's been really interesting, and especially because you've all got quite different perspectives. You're all coming at it with slightly different hats on. It's been really, really interesting for me. I'm going to kick off. Charlie, I'm going to ask you first for sort of one final reflection.
I think my reflection is that as a kind of a community of sort of change makers, I suppose, of people that want to see change in the world through our various different roles, IPPR and the work that you're doing is enabling us to kind of distill what works and share that. And it's just fantastic. And I feel like we're sort of in these conversations pushing forward in that spirit. For me, the next steps are around the political narratives. I think that's a sort of part of the work that we need to do more on. And I really think taking the territory of car manufacturers and car lobbyists is the way to go. So freedom, safety, and fairness, in particular social justice. And that ties together the politics and the policy really neatly around those three containers. And just as I said before, I think procedural fairness is really key. Explanations, voice, and respectful treatment.
Thanks, Charlie. Who am I going to? Carolyn, can I come to you next for a quick wrap-up reflection?
Yeah, I think listening, listening and talking to communities. I think, citizens' assemblies are great, climate assemblies. Like Charlie said earlier, giving people a chance to speak and be listened to, and not just relying on consultations where you're presented something that's already developed, and we know that it's a certain group of people that tend to respond to consultations, and really getting into communities at a grassroots level to give people an opportunity to come along on this journey. We know that citizens' assemblies can often produce some really quite radical proposals because people are given that time and space and information to sort of really go deep into an issue, and you get a nice representative group then as well. And something I didn't mention earlier, we were talking about buses, trolley buses, we're a big fan of. Very cheap to roll out, much quicker and easier to do than electrifying your whole fleet. And we've got some sort of feasibility study coming out later this autumn. So look out for that.
Great. We'll watch that space. Waseem, you next.
This has been great, sharing a platform with such inspirational people who are doing some remarkable work and have done some incredible things, and being able to share some of the success stories, but also some of the challenges, I think has been really important. For me, the key message is we need to engage with our communities. We need to work as closely as possible. We need to give them the resources, the skill set, and we need to trust them. Our communities know best. And too often we do things top down, but we need to do things bottom up and give them the ability to make that change. That needs resources. It needs strong political leadership. And just on the politics, we need strong political leaders to make the change. Status quo is not going to be good enough. We need to make change. And the only way we make change is through radical leaders, and support them. Too often, as politicians, the only people we hear from are those that are opposed to something. I'm just introducing a low traffic neighborhood in my patch. 50 people turned out opposed to some of the changes. And what I made very, very clear to them was there's over 9,000 people who live in my patch. The people that have turned up, I absolutely respect them, and we'll do our best to address the concerns they've got. But that's not a sample of what's really happening, because too often, if you agree with something, you're not going to bother going to a local ward meeting or writing to your councillor or tweeting them. If you're opposed to it, you will definitely do that. So if you want to support elected councillors and members of parliament who are doing good, do contact them and let them know, ideally in a very public forum, that they are doing good and you support them, because that gives them the encouragement and the support to continue being radical about the changes that are required. Thank you, IPPR, for the report and organising this really, really valuable session.
Thanks, Waseem. Carolyn, you've popped your hand up. I'm going to come to Liz. And is it a very quick reflection? I'm conscious of the time.
Yeah, okay, it's super quick. Just to say that we would advocate for, if you're looking at bringing in changes, you've got about providing that psychological support for councillors, which is something we talked about a little bit earlier, particularly if you've got councillors from minoritised groups that are likely to encounter, more kind of death threats, racism, misogyny, then it's really important to put that support in place and know that you are going to get those kind of things and plan for it. Yeah.
Thanks for that. And that was also something that we heard as well when we did our engagement with councillors, is that they do really appreciate hearing from constituents who are supportive of what they're doing. All right, Liz, quick reflection from you.
Yeah, I think a lot of probably what I was going to say has been covered actually by both Carolyn and Waseem. It's again to listen, to talk to people. We're all deeply influenced. Our behaviour is deeply influenced about people who are around us. So I think for doing long-term change, we need to be thinking of putting forward those positives that can occur from this. And again, a lot of that can come from grassroots and just those conversations.
Thanks. And then Louise?
We've said it, read the report and do the recommendations, but just I'm not going to repeat everyone else. Things that I've done just personally is I open all my windows when I'm hoovering now. Who knew how polluting hoovering was? I didn't. And then the same with cooking. Use your extractor fans and be careful you're not getting mold in your house. And if your house is too cold to heat, then do ring your council and see if you qualify for any of the sort of eco or hug grants to try and get your house warm enough to heat without having horrible indoor black mold, which is also very dangerous. So yeah, there's the policy stuffs in the report. That's just the kind of keeping your air clean indoors, where we spend 90% of our time, get out and run around on the grass. Okay.
Thanks, Louise. And thank you everyone for dialing in. You've been a really great engaged audience. It's been really lovely to have loads of questions coming through on the chat and the Q&A box. I think my colleagues just popped the report in there, and if any of the panelists are on Twitter or want us to find you anywhere, please drop those in the chat. It's been really great to have you all. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And thank you very much to all of our panelists. And it's been a really great conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya. Thanks for chairing.
Thank you, Maya.
Indeed, thank you very much. That was really good. Well chaired.
Thanks, Maya.
Thanks.